Captain Marcus Wellington had served the royal family for 23 years. His weathered hands had signed countless security reports, but nothing could have prepared him for what he would discover on that cold October morning in 2022. The palace corridors echoed with hushed whispers as staff moved about their duties, still processing the loss of their beloved queen just weeks earlier. Marcus was conducting his routine security sweep of the private royal offices when he noticed something unusual. The door to the Queen's personal study, which should have been sealed according to protocol, stood slightly ajar. A thin sliver of warm light spilled into the dark hallway. His military training kicked in immediately. No one should be in there without proper authorization. He approached the door with careful steps, his hand instinctively moving to his radio. Through the crack, he could see someone hunched over the Queen's antique mahogany desk. The figure wore an expensive navy blue suit and moved with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Marcus recognized her immediately. It was Camilla, now the queen consort, but at that moment, she was simply a woman rifling through papers that didn't belong to her. What struck Marcus as odd wasn't just her presence, but her behavior. She was frantically searching through drawers, pulling out documents and scanning them quickly before tossing them aside. Her usually composed demeanor had cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. Papers scattered across the floor around her feet like fallen leaves. Then he saw it. Camilla pulled out a thick cream-colored document with an official royal seal. Her face went pale as she read it, her hands trembling slightly. Marcus had seen enough legal documents during his service to recognize a will when he saw one. But this wasn't just any will. This was the Queen's final testament. Camilla's reaction was immediate and shocking. Her face contorted with what looked like rage mixed with panic. She glanced around the room as if checking for witnesses, then did something that made Marcus's blood run cold. She began tearing the document, slowly at first, then with increasing violence until the pieces fell like confetti around her designer shoes. Marcus felt his heart pounding against his ribcage. He had just witnessed something that could shake the very foundations of the monarchy. The Queen's will, the document that would determine the future of royal assets, titles, and perhaps even the line of succession, had just been destroyed before his eyes. He knew he had to act quickly, but also carefully. One wrong move could destroy his career or worse. As Camilla gathered the torn pieces, Marcus quietly activated the recording function on his security device. Every royal guard carried these devices, but they were meant for documenting security threats, not recording members of the royal family committing what appeared to be a serious crime. Camilla stuffed the torn pieces into a leather briefcase, her movements now quick and efficient. She had regained some of her composure, but Marcus could see the sweat on her forehead despite the cool morning air. She moved toward a small fireplace in the corner of the study, clearly intending to burn the evidence. Marcus faced an impossible choice. He could confront her now, but that would mean going against someone who was now technically his superior. He could report it through proper channels, but who would believe a guard over the queen consort? Or he could wait and gather more evidence, risking that this crucial moment would be lost forever. The weight of royal protocol pressed down on him like a heavy cloak. He had sworn an oath to protect the crown and uphold the law. But what happened when those two duties conflicted? As he watched Camilla strike a match, Marcus realized that his next decision would either make him a hero or destroy everything he had worked for. The small flame flickered in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the study walls. Camilla held the torn pieces of the will above the fire, her hand steady now, her face set with determination. In that moment, Marcus understood that he wasn't just witnessing the destruction of a document he was watching. History being rewritten by someone with the power to do so, but Marcus Wellington hadn't spent over 2 decades protecting the crown to watch it be corrupted from within. He stepped back from the door, his mind racing with possibilities. He needed proof. He needed allies, and most importantly, he needed a plan. The torn will might be destroyed, but his recording device had captured everything. Now he just had to figure out what to do with the most dangerous secret in the kingdom. As Camilla fed the last pieces of paper to the flames, Marcus silently withdrew down the corridor. His shift would end in 6 hours, but his real work was just beginning. He had stumbled upon a conspiracy at the highest levels of the monarchy, and somehow a simple guard from Yorkshire was going to have to find a way to bring the truth to light without losing his life in the process. Marcus spent the next 3 days in a state of constant anxiety. Every time he passed Camilla in the palace corridors, his heart rate spiked. She showed no signs of recognizing him or suspecting that anyone had witnessed her actions. To the outside world, she was the grieving queen consort, performing her duties with grace and dignity during a difficult transition period. But Marcus knew better. He had reviewed the recording dozens of times, memorizing every detail. The audio was clear enough to hear the sound of tearing paper, and while the video was partially obscured by the doorframe, it clearly showed Camilla destroying official documents in the Queen's private study. The problem was finding someone to trust with this information. Marcus's immediate supervisor, Chief Security Officer James Harrison, was a company man who followed protocol religiously. He would likely demand that Marcus report through official channels, which would mean the information would travel up a chain of command that included people loyal to Camilla. Marcus decided his best option was Detective Inspector Sarah Chen from Scotland Yard's Royal Protection Unit. Sarah had worked closely with palace security for 8 years and had a reputation for integrity that was beyond question. More importantly, she operated independently of the palace hierarchy and answered directly to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. He arranged to meet Sarah at a small cafe in Westminster, far enough from the palace to avoid suspicion, but close enough that their meeting wouldn't seem unusual. When she arrived, Marcus could see the concern in her eyes. Sarah was a sharp woman in her early 40s with short black hair and a no-nonsense attitude that had earned her respect throughout the force. "This better be important." "Marcus," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "You sounded like the world was ending when you called." Marcus pulled out his security device and placed it on the table between them. "Sarah, what I'm about to show you could change everything. But before I do, I need to know that you'll help me handle this properly. I can't go through normal channels." Sarah's expression grew serious. In all the years she had known Marcus, he had never asked for anything like this. "Show me what you've got." Marcus played the recording, watching Sarah's face as she absorbed what she was seeing and hearing. Her trained eye caught details that might escape others. The official seal on the document, the systematic way Camilla searched the desk, the deliberate destruction of what was clearly an important legal document. When the recording ended, Sarah sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, she looked up at Marcus with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Do you understand what you've stumbled into here? This isn't just about a destroyed will. If this document contained different provisions than whatever will is eventually produced, we're talking about fraud on a massive scale." Marcus nodded grimly. "I've been thinking about nothing else for 3 days. The question is, what do we do about it?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "First, we need to secure this evidence properly. That recording needs to be duplicated and stored in multiple secure locations. Second, we need to find out if there are any copies of the original will or if anyone else knows about its contents. How do we do that without alerting Camilla or her allies?" "Very carefully," Sarah replied. "The Queen's personal solicitor would have been involved in drafting the will. Sir Edmund Blackwood has been the royal family's legal counsel for 30 years. If anyone would know about alternate versions or copies, it would be him." Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. "Can we trust him?" "Sir Edmund's reputation is spotless, but more importantly, he's legally bound by solicitor-client privilege even after the Queen's death. If we approach him correctly, he might be willing to help us verify whether the will he has matches what you saw being destroyed." Over the next hour, they developed a plan. Sarah would approach Sir Edmund through official channels, ostensibly as part of a routine security review following the Queen's death. Meanwhile, Marcus would continue his normal duties while keeping a close watch on Camilla's activities. "There's something else," Marcus said, as they prepared to leave. "I've been thinking about timing. Why would Camilla destroy the will now? The official reading isn't scheduled for another 2 weeks. Sarah had been wondering the same thing. Either she needed time to create a forgery, or someone was getting too close to discovering the truth. My guess is that the original will contained provisions she couldn't live with." As they parted ways, Sarah gave Marcus a warning that would haunt him for days to come. "Be extremely careful around the palace. If Camilla was willing to destroy the Queen's will, there's no telling what else she might do to protect herself. Watch your back, and don't trust anyone until we figure out how deep this goes." That evening, Marcus returned to his small flat in South London with a new appreciation for the danger he was in. He created multiple copies of the recording, storing them in various locations including a safety deposit box and with a trusted friend who had no connection to the palace. As he lay in bed that night, Marcus thought about the oath he had taken when he first joined the royal guard. He had promised to protect the crown, but now he wondered if protecting the crown meant protecting it from those who would corrupt it from within. The queen he had served faithfully for over 2 decades was gone, but her final wishes, whatever they might have been, deserved to be honored. Tomorrow, Sarah would begin her careful approach to Sir Edmund Blackwood. Within days, they would know whether Marcus had witnessed the destruction of the real royal will or simply a draft. Either way, there was no turning back now. The truth, whatever it might be, was worth the risk. Sir Edmund Blackwood's law office in Lincoln's Inn looked exactly as one would expect from a man who had served the royal family for 3 decades. Dark wood paneling lined the walls and leather-bound legal volumes filled floor-to-ceiling shelves. The elderly solicitor, now in his 70s, had weathered many royal storms, but nothing had prepared him for Detective Inspector Sarah Chen's visit. Sarah had chosen her approach carefully. She presented herself as conducting a routine security review, focusing on the protection of important royal documents. Sir Edmund, a man of impeccable manners and sharp intellect, welcomed her into his office with the courtesy befitting his position. "Detective Inspector Chen," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his imposing desk. "How may I assist Scotland Yard with royal security matters?" Sarah had rehearsed this conversation multiple times, knowing that one wrong word could alert the wrong people, or cause Sir Edmund to shut down completely. "Sir Edmund, as part of our post-transition security review, we're verifying the safety and authenticity of critical royal documents. I understand you were involved in preparing Her late Majesty's final will and testament." The old solicitor's expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps concern, or maybe recognition that this was more than a routine inquiry. "Indeed, I had that honor. The document was prepared with the utmost care and according to Her Majesty's explicit wishes. Can you confirm that the will in your possession is the only version, and that it remains secure?" Sir Edmund paused, his fingers drumming silently on his desk. After 30 years of serving the crown, he had developed an acute sense for when something wasn't quite right. "Detective Inspector, may I ask what has prompted this particular line of inquiry? In my experience, Scotland Yard doesn't typically concern itself with document authentication unless there's a specific threat." Sarah had anticipated this question and decided that partial honesty was her best strategy. "We've received information suggesting that there may have been unauthorized access to certain royal documents. We're conducting a thorough review to ensure the integrity of all important papers." The elderly solicitor leaned back in his chair, his keen eyes studying Sarah's face. "I see. And this unauthorized access, do you have specific concerns about the will?" "Sir Edmund, I need to ask you a direct question, and I hope you'll understand why it's important. Have you had any contact with the Queen Consort regarding the contents of the will since Her late Majesty's passing?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sir Edmund's expression hardened slightly, and Sarah could see him weighing his options. Finally, he spoke with the measured tone of a man choosing his words very carefully. 3 days ago, the Queen Consort contacted my office, requesting a meeting to discuss the will. She expressed particular interest in the timing of the reading and certain specific provisions. I found her inquiries somewhat unusual, as the will's contents are typically not discussed prior to the official reading. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Did you meet with her?" "I did not. I informed her that all matters regarding the will would be handled according to proper protocol, and that I could not discuss its contents with anyone, including members of the royal family, until the appointed time." "How did she respond to that?" Sir Edmund's pause spoke volumes. "She was displeased. She made it quite clear that she expected special consideration given her position. When I remained firm in my position, she suggested that perhaps the royal family might need to reconsider their choice of legal counsel." Sarah recognized the threat for what it was. Camilla had tried to pressure Sir Edmund into revealing the will's contents, and when that failed, she had resorted to intimidation.
"Sir Edmund, I need to share something with you, but I must ask for your complete discretion." The old solicitor nodded gravely.
Sarah pulled out a tablet and showed him carefully selected portions of Marcus's recording. enough to demonstrate that Camilla had been in the Queen's study destroying documents, but not enough to reveal all their evidence. Sir Edmund watched in stunned silence. When the video ended, he removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, clearly buying time to process what he had just seen. Detective Inspector, what you've shown me is deeply troubling. If those were authentic royal documents being destroyed, Sir Edmund, I need to ask you something crucial. Is it possible that there were multiple versions of the Queen's will? Could what we witnessed being destroyed have been a legitimate version that differed from the one you have? The elderly solicitor was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with professional obligations and moral duty. Finally, he spoke with the weight of someone revealing a carefully guarded secret. The Queen did indeed make changes to her will in the final months of her life. She was very specific about certain new provisions, and insisted that the previous version be destroyed once the new one was finalized. However, she also asked me to prepare a preliminary draft of her proposed changes before the final version was completed. Sarah's heart raced. What happened to that preliminary draft? According to standard protocol, it should have been destroyed once the final will was executed. However, the Queen specifically asked me to keep a sealed copy in my personal safe, separate from the official will. She said it was for security purposes in case anything ever happened to the primary document. The implications were staggering. If Camilla had destroyed the final version of the will, thinking she was eliminating evidence of changes she didn't like, the preliminary draft might contain similar or identical provisions. Sir Edmund, would you be willing to compare that preliminary draft with what I can show you from our evidence? The old solicitor stood and walked to a portrait of Queen Victoria hanging on his wall. Behind it was a hidden safe that Sarah would have never suspected existed. Detective Inspector, I have served the Crown faithfully for 30 years. If someone has attempted to subvert the Queen's final wishes, it is my duty to ensure that justice is served. He withdrew a sealed envelope marked with the royal seal and the Queen's personal signature. As he broke the seal, Sarah realized they were about to discover whether Marcus had witnessed the destruction of a meaningless draft or the most important legal document in the kingdom. The contents of that envelope would either vindicate their suspicions or destroy their case entirely. Either way, Sir Edmund Blackwood was about to become either their greatest ally or their most dangerous enemy. The document that Sir Edmund pulled from the sealed envelope changed everything. As he spread it carefully on his desk, Sarah could see it bore the same royal seal and formal structure as the document Marcus had filmed being destroyed. But it was the contents that made her breath catch in her throat. The preliminary draft revealed provisions that would have sent shockwaves through the royal family and the British establishment. The Queen had made substantial changes to the distribution of her personal wealth, including jewelry, art collections, and private properties worth hundreds of millions of pounds. More significantly, she had altered the terms regarding certain royal titles and ceremonial roles. Sir Edmund, Sarah whispered, scanning the document. These provisions, they're completely different from what the public expects. The elderly solicitor nodded grimly. The Queen was very specific about these changes. She had become increasingly concerned about certain influences within the family and wanted to ensure that her legacy remained untainted. According to the draft, substantial portions of the Queen's personal wealth were to go to charitable foundations rather than remaining within the royal family. Perhaps more importantly, the document contained specific restrictions on how certain titles and roles could be exercised, including limitations that would have significantly constrained Camilla's power as queen consort. Sarah photographed key sections of the document with Sir Edmund's permission, understanding that they now had proof of motive. If this preliminary draft reflected the final will's contents, Camilla would have had compelling reasons to destroy it. Sir Edmund, when is the official will reading scheduled? In 10 days. The current plan is to read the will that's in my main safe, the one that was filed as the official final version. But Detective Inspector, after seeing your evidence, I have serious doubts about whether that document represents the Queen's true final wishes. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. What would happen if we revealed that the real final will had been destroyed and replaced with an earlier version? It would create a constitutional crisis unlike anything we've seen in modern times. The legitimacy of the entire succession could be questioned. The legal challenges alone could tie up the courts for years. But Sarah was more concerned about immediate dangers. Sir Edmund, how many people knew about these changed provisions? Very few. The Queen was extremely secretive about the modifications. Myself, obviously. Her private secretary, Dame Margaret Thornberry, who helped coordinate the meetings, and... Sir Edmund paused, his face growing pale. And who else? The Queen mentioned that she had discussed some of the changes with King Charles, wanting to prepare him for the implications. But she was very clear that Camilla was not to know about the specific provisions until the official reading. Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place, so Camilla would have known that changes were made, but not what those changes were. That would explain why she was searching so frantically through the Queen's papers. Over the next hour, Sir Edmund helped Sarah understand the full scope of what they were dealing with. The Queen's changes weren't just about money. They represented a fundamental shift in how she viewed the future of the monarchy. The restrictions on Camilla's role were particularly significant, limiting her involvement in certain ceremonial functions and charitable patronages. "There's something else," Sir Edmund said quietly. "The Queen asked me to prepare a letter to be opened only if questions arose about the authenticity of her will. That letter is also in my personal safe." The letter, when opened, proved to be the Queen's insurance policy. In her own handwriting, she detailed her concerns about certain influences within the royal family and her reasons for making the changes to her will. She specifically mentioned her worry that some family members might attempt to circumvent her wishes if they knew about them in advance. Sarah realized they now had everything they needed to prove their case, but she also understood that using this evidence would require extreme care. "Sir Edmund, we need to consider our next steps very carefully. If we move too quickly or carelessly, this evidence could disappear or be discredited." The elderly solicitor agreed. "Detective Inspector, I've been thinking about this throughout our conversation. There is one person who might be able to help us verify the timeline and provide additional evidence." "Who?" "Dame Margaret Thornberry, the Queen's private secretary. If anyone would know the exact sequence of events regarding the will changes, it would be her. Moreover, she's been growing increasingly concerned about certain activities within the palace since the Queen's death." Sarah knew Dame Margaret by reputation. Formidable woman in her 60s who had served the Queen with unwavering loyalty for over 15 years. If they could convince her to help, they would have an unimpeachable witness from within the royal household. "Can you arrange a meeting?" "I can try, but it will need to be handled very delicately. Dame Margaret is intensely loyal to the crown, but she's also fiercely protective of the Queen's memory. If she believes that someone has dishonored the Queen's final wishes, she would be a powerful ally." As Sarah prepared to leave Sir Edmund's office, she realized that their investigation had reached a critical juncture. They had evidence of motive, opportunity, and the crime itself, but they also knew that they were up against someone with immense power and resources, who had already proven willing to commit serious crimes to protect her interests. "Sir Edmund, I need to ask you to take precautions. Make copies of everything we've discussed and store them in multiple secure locations. If something happens to these documents..." The old solicitor smiled grimly. "Detective Inspector, I've been protecting royal secrets for 30 years. I know how to keep things safe, but I share your concern about the dangers we're facing." That evening, Sarah met with Marcus at a different location, a quiet pub in Camden where they could speak freely without fear of surveillance. When she told him about the preliminary draft in the Queen's letter, Marcus felt a mixture of vindication and terror. "So we were right," he said quietly. "Camilla destroyed the real will because it contained provisions she couldn't accept." Sarah nodded. "But now we need to decide how to proceed. We have enough evidence to prove what happened, but we also need to consider the consequences of revealing it." As they sat in the dimly lit pub, both of them understood that they had moved beyond simple crime investigation. They were now dealing with a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of the British monarchy, and their next decisions would determine not just their own fates, but the future of the crown itself. Dame Margaret Thornberry agreed to meet with Sir Edmund and Detective Inspector Chen, but only after taking extraordinary precautions. The meeting was arranged at her private residence in Kensington, a modest townhouse that reflected her practical nature rather than her elevated position within the royal household. When Sarah and Sir Edmund arrived, they found Dame Margaret in her sitting room, surrounded by boxes of documents and personal items from her years of service. At 64, She maintained the sharp bearing that had made her one of the most respected figures in the royal establishment. But Sarah could see the strain of recent weeks written in the lines around her eyes. "Sir Edmund," Dame Margaret said, rising to greet them, "your message suggested this meeting concerned the Queen's final wishes. I confess I've been troubled by certain irregularities since Her Majesty's passing." Sarah watched as Sir Edmund explained their discoveries, presenting the evidence carefully and methodically. Dame Margaret listened in absolute silence, her expression growing increasingly grave as she absorbed the implications of what they were telling her. When Sir Edmund finished, Dame Margaret sat quietly for several minutes, clearly processing everything she had heard. Finally, she spoke with the measured tone of someone choosing her words very carefully. "What you've described aligns with concerns I've been unable to voice until now. The Queen was indeed very secretive about her final will changes, but she did confide certain details to me in the weeks before her death." Dame Margaret walked to a secure filing cabinet and withdrew a leather-bound journal. "I maintained detailed notes of all my conversations with Her Majesty, as was my practice. The entries from her final weeks paint a troubling picture." She opened the journal to a specific page and began reading. September 15th. Her Majesty expressed concern about certain family members' expectations regarding inheritance. She specifically mentioned worry that some provisions might be circumvented or ignored if known in advance. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Did she mention anyone specifically?" Dame Margaret turned several pages. September 22nd. Her Majesty instructed me to ensure that her private study remained sealed after her death until the will reading. She was very specific about this, saying that certain people might attempt to access her personal papers. The implication was clear. The Queen had anticipated exactly what Marcus had witnessed. "Dame Margaret," Sir Edmund said gently, "we need to ask you about events since the Queen's death. Have you noticed any unusual activities or requests?" The private secretary's expression darkened. 3 days after the funeral, I received instructions to provide Camilla with access to the Queen's private papers for sentimental reasons. When I explained that the study was sealed pending the will reading, I was told that my services might no longer be required if I couldn't be more accommodating. Sarah exchanged glances with Sir Edmund. The timeline matched perfectly with Marcus's recording. Dame Margaret continued, "I refused, of course, but I was concerned enough to check the study myself the following morning. The seal had been broken and several items appeared to have been disturbed. Did you report this? To whom?" "The people making the requests were now technically my superiors. I documented everything in my notes, but I felt powerless to act without proof of wrongdoing." Sarah realized they had found the perfect ally. Dame Margaret not only had access to crucial information, but she also had her own suspicions about what had been happening. "Dame Margaret, we need to show you something, but we must ask for your complete discretion." When Sarah played Marcus's recording, Dame Margaret's professional composure finally cracked. Her hand flew to her mouth as she watched Camilla systematically destroy what was clearly an official document. "My God," she whispered. "She actually did it. She destroyed the Queen's will." "The question now," Sir Edmund said, "is what we do with this knowledge." Dame Margaret stood and walked to her window, looking out at the quiet Kensington street. "For 40 years I've served the Crown with absolute loyalty, but my loyalty was to the institution and its principles, not to individuals who would corrupt it." She turned back to face them, her resolve clearly strengthened. "The Queen trusted me with her final wishes. She knew something like this might happen, which is why she took so many precautions. I won't let her down now." Over the next 2 hours, they developed a comprehensive plan. Dame Margaret would provide additional documentation from her files, including correspondence that established the timeline of the Queen's will changes. Sir Edmund would prepare legal challenges to ensure that the authentic provisions were eventually honored. Sarah would coordinate with law enforcement to ensure that criminal charges could be filed when the time was right. But they also faced a crucial timing issue. The official will reading was scheduled for the following week, and they needed to decide whether to act before or after that event. "If we wait until after the reading," Sir Edmund explained, "Camilla will have publicly benefited from the forged will. Reversing that will be much more complicated legally and politically. But if we act beforehand," Dame Margaret pointed out, "we risk looking like we're attempting to disrupt the natural succession process. The public might see us as traitors rather than truth-tellers." Sarah had been thinking about this dilemma since leaving Sir Edmund's office. There's a third option. What if we ensure that the authentic provisions are read alongside the forged will? If we can prove that the document currently in Sir Edmund's safe isn't the real final will, we can demand that the preliminary draft be considered as the closest representation of the Queen's true wishes. The plan was risky, but elegant. They would attend the will reading as scheduled, but armed with evidence that would expose the substitution when it became apparent that the provisions being read didn't match what the Queen had actually intended. Dame Margaret nodded approvingly. The Queen would have appreciated the symmetry of that approach. She always believed that truth had a way of revealing itself when the time was right. As the meeting concluded, all three understood that they had committed to a course of action that would either restore integrity to the royal succession or destroy their careers and possibly their lives. But they also knew that the Queen's memory and the future of the monarchy were worth the risk. "There's one more thing," Dame Margaret said, as they prepared to leave. "I've been in contact with other longtime royal staff members who have noticed irregularities since the transition. If we need additional witnesses or support, we won't be alone." Sarah realized that what had started as one guard's accidental discovery had uncovered a much larger network of people committed to protecting the crown from corruption. The battle lines were being drawn, and the will reading would be their moment of truth. The day of the will reading arrived with London shrouded in an unusually thick fog, as if the city itself sensed the momentous events about to unfold. The ceremony was to be held in the Oak Room at Buckingham Palace, a formal space reserved for the most important royal functions. Only a select group of family members, senior staff, and legal representatives would be present. Marcus had positioned himself strategically outside the Oak Room, officially assigned to security duty but actually serving as a lookout for Sarah and the team. His radio crackled with routine security updates, but his attention was focused entirely on the closed doors behind which the future of the monarchy would be decided. Inside the room, the atmosphere was tense. King Charles sat at the head of the polished oak table, flanked by Camilla and other senior family members. Sir Edmund stood at a lectern with the official will, while Dame Margaret sat in the back corner with her ever-present notebook, documenting everything as she had done for decades. Sarah had taken a position near the back of the room, technically present as part of the security detail, but ready to act when the moment came. In her jacket pocket, she carried copies of all their evidence, Marcus's recording, photos of the preliminary draft, and Dame Margaret's detailed notes. Sir Edmund began the reading with the traditional formal language, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. "I, Elizabeth II, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and of her other realms and territories, Queen, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, declare this to be my last will and testament." As Sir Edmund read the opening provisions, which dealt with minor personal items and charitable bequests, everything seemed normal. But Sarah noticed Camilla's growing tension as they approached the sections dealing with major assets and titles. Then came the moment they had all been waiting for. Sir Edmund reached the provisions regarding the distribution of the Queen's personal wealth and the parameters of Camilla's role as Queen Consort. As he read the terms, which were substantially different from what the preliminary draft had contained, Sarah saw Dame Margaret make a small notation in her book. That was the signal they had agreed upon. Dame Margaret had confirmed that the will being read did not match the Queen's final intentions. Sarah stood up, her movement catching everyone's attention. "Your Majesty, I regret the interruption, but I believe there are questions about the authenticity of the document being read." The room erupted in shocked whispers. King Charles looked bewildered while Camilla's face went pale. "What is the meaning of this?" the king demanded. Sir Edmund, following their carefully rehearsed plan, spoke with grave formality. "Your Majesty, in light of recent evidence that has come to my attention, I have concerns about whether this document represents Her late Majesty's true final wishes." Dame Margaret rose from her seat. "Your Majesty, I believe Sir Edmund is referring to evidence of which I am also aware. With your permission, I think Detective Inspector Chen should present what Scotland Yard has discovered." The next few minutes were among the most dramatic in modern royal history. Sarah methodically presented the evidence, Marcus's recording, the preliminary draft with its different provisions, and the Queen's own letter explaining her concerns about potential interference with her will. As the recording played on Sarah's tablet, showing Camilla destroying the official document in the Queen's study, the room fell into absolute silence. When it ended, all eyes turned to Camilla, whose composure had completely cracked. "This is preposterous," she stammered. "That recording could be fabricated. You can't seriously believe." But Sir Edmund was already producing the preliminary draft from his briefcase. "Your Majesty, this document contains provisions that differ substantially from the will I just read. Given the evidence of the destruction of what appears to have been the final version, I believe this draft may be the closest representation we have of your mother's true final wishes." King Charles sat in stunned silence as he reviewed the preliminary draft. The differences were stark. The authentic version contained far more restrictive provisions regarding Camilla's role and substantially different distributions of the Queen's personal wealth. Dame Margaret provided the final piece of evidence. "Your Majesty, I have detailed notes of my conversations with Her late Majesty about these changes. She specifically expressed concern that certain family members might attempt to circumvent her wishes if they knew about them in advance." The room had become a courtroom, and Camilla was clearly the defendant. Several family members who had initially appeared skeptical now looked at her with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Marcus, listening through his earpiece to Sarah's transmitted updates, knew that the moment of truth had arrived. Inside the Oak Room, the most powerful family in Britain was confronting the reality that one of their own had committed a serious crime to protect her interests. King Charles finally spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. "If these allegations are true, they represent not just a crime, but a betrayal of everything the Crown represents." Over the following hours, the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Camilla had indeed destroyed the Queen's final will and allowed an earlier version to be presented as authentic. The financial implications alone were staggering. Millions of pounds that should have gone to charity would instead have remained within the royal family. But the constitutional implications were even more serious. The Queen's restrictions on Camilla's role were designed to limit her influence over royal decisions and charitable patronages. By destroying those restrictions, Camilla had effectively given herself powers that the Queen had specifically intended to deny her. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Camilla was arrested on charges of fraud, destruction of legal documents, and conspiracy. The preliminary draft was accepted by the courts as the best available representation of the Queen's final wishes, and its provisions were implemented accordingly. Marcus Wellington, the guard who had stumbled upon the conspiracy by accident, found himself testifying before Parliament about royal security procedures. His courage in coming forward was recognized with a commendation, though he always maintained that he was simply doing his duty to protect the Crown. Dame Margaret Thornbury was appointed as a special advisor to ensure that such irregularities could never happen again. Sir Edmund Blackwood, despite his advanced age, agreed to lead a complete review of royal document security procedures. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen was promoted to head a new unit dedicated to protecting the integrity of royal institutions. Her first assignment was to implement safeguards ensuring that no one person could ever again have the power to alter or destroy such crucial documents. The scandal rocked the monarchy to its foundations, but it also demonstrated that the institutions designed to protect the Crown could still function when faced with corruption from within. The Queen's final wishes were ultimately honored. Her charitable bequests reached their intended recipients, and the restrictions she had placed on future royal conduct remained in force. Camilla's trial became one of the most watched legal proceedings in British history. The evidence was overwhelming and her conviction was swift. She was stripped of her titles and sentenced to several years in prison, though she served only a fraction of that time before being quietly released into exile. The monarchy survived the crisis, but it emerged fundamentally changed. New procedures were implemented to ensure transparency in the handling of royal documents, and the power of any single family member to circumvent established protocols was permanently limited. Marcus Wellington returned to his duties as a royal guard, but he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the greatest threats to the Crown come from within. He had helped preserve the integrity of an institution that had endured for centuries, ensuring that it would continue to serve the British people with honor and authenticity. The Queen's final will, as revealed through the preliminary draft, showed a monarch who understood the challenges facing her family and her country. Her provisions reflected wisdom, caution, and a deep commitment to the principles that had guided her reign. Thanks to the courage of a loyal guard, a dedicated detective, a principled solicitor, and a faithful private secretary, those final wishes were ultimately respected and implemented. The fog that had shrouded London on the day of the will reading eventually lifted, revealing a monarchy that was bruised but not broken, tested but not destroyed. The crown endured as it always had, protected by those who understood that serving the monarchy meant more than serving the individuals who wore it.